It's 11:40 The Bet and Audacy Sports, and I know the NFL playoffs are going on, but a lot of combat sports talk. We've been talking a lot about Dana White, and it ain't because of the UFC pay-per-view. You know, we're talking a lot of wrestling, so we need to get into the specifics on what's going on with the WWE and Vince McMahon. So joining us right now is Will Washington. You can follow him on Twitter, William RBR. He's a host at Fightful Selects, and the Grapsody podcast. Will, first off, thank you for joining us. And plain and simple, for those that aren't that big of a fan and have just been seeing some of these news clippings on big outlets, what does Vince McMahon's return to the WWE really mean?
Well, there's a lot of implications here. We can talk about the financial implications of it. We could talk about the creative implications of it. We could talk about the morale implications of it. There's a lot of different angles that it means, because at the end of the day, Vince McMahon is the creator. He's the founder. He was at one point the CEO, chairman of WWE. And, of course, he was ousted this past summer after some sexual misconduct allegations came out against him. He basically resigned, and a lot of his roles were filled, right? His creative role in the company, because for those who don't know, he was, of course, wrestling being a predetermined sport. Vince McMahon was the creative force behind it. Now, no matter who else had been in the company at that point, you could talk about your Vince Russos, you could talk about your Chris Kreskes and Stephanie McMahon, everybody who had been at the head of creative at one point. Everything creative in WWE always went through Vince McMahon. And for the first time this past summer, Vince McMahon was not in the creative picture, and that was given to his son-in-law, Triple H. He was also no longer CEO. The co-CEOs were Nick Khan and Stephanie McMahon, and then he was no longer on the board. And this past December, Vince McMahon basically rewrote the bylaws as WWE is looking to sign a new media rights deal. And when I talk about media rights deals, I'm referring to the fact that WWE
on Fox, on USA Network, and all
exactly. And that's their biggest revenue stream. They signed 5-year deals back in 2019, and if you look at your calendar, it's 2023. It's about time to renegotiate some new deals. And Vince McMahon rewrote the bylaws to basically state that those deals cannot be renegotiated without him. And also potential sale of the company. There's been talks of sale of the company selling for the last about 4 years now, but the talks really ramped up recently. Vince McMahon also included in those bylaws that he has to be involved in any negotiations regarding a sale, and he has the ability to do that, right? He owns 30-something percent. I don't have the exact number, but he owns 30-something percent of the shares of the company, and he has 80% voting power on the board. So basically, he was able to be reinserted in. Last week, though, his daughter, Stephanie McMahon, resigned from the company. She had been with the company since she was an adult. And
literally born in it.
Literally born in it. She's had various roles in the company. When it came, she actually had a musical role in the company at one point when she was really young, and then she became head of creative. She became chief branding officer, and she was co-CEO just recently. But she had actually taken a leave from the company last year. So there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of talent afraid of what this means, because you could talk about how Vince McMahon was on a bit of a cutting spree from 2020 on. He was cutting talent left and right, and a lot of people were speculating that had a lot to do with the potential sale of the company. And a lot of those guys got hired back once Vince McMahon was kind of shown the door. And now that he's back in play, there's a lot of talent now worried that maybe the talent that Triple H rehired may keep their spot, but what about the other guys now who might feel like they get the chop now?
And for those, before we really dive into all of this, for those that are listening and they're like, this reminds me of something. Yes, this is real life Succession. Yeah. I promise you, for real. And so thank you for explaining everything for those that aren't fully aware or knee deep in it. But now I'm going to ask you it was funny because I was like, okay, this is perfect. This is a new week. The dust is settled. But any day, any minute, anything can happen. So it hasn't really settled. It's not until it's actually sold. But with everything that's happened, it's been a hell of a 2022. And then 2023, we're back here with more drama and more news. How do you kind of take everything that's happened?
It's hard to kind of keep an eye on anything and feel a reasonable assessment of things, because things keep changing by the minute. This story just seems to continually be evolving. We got details that, of course, there was a letter exchange between Vince McMahon and the board back in December, and one of the things that came out of that that seems to kind of be going wayside is that there were more allegations that aren't public yet, and that's a concern. There's also the fact that who's going to buy it, right? There was a big rumor that popped up last Tuesday that
we'll get into that here in a second.
Yeah. There was a big rumor last Tuesday that dropped, and there might be some smoke to that fire. But then now there's other rumors dropping. There's a story going around now. It came out of Ringside News, and it was later confirmed by the Wrestling Observer that Vince is back in the office. And, Triple H had a creative meeting this past week, but one of the things that he said in that meeting, sorry, it wasn't a creative meeting, it was a talent meeting, and he met with the roster right before SmackDown. But one of the things that slipped in that meeting was he happened to state that he has been talking with Vince McMahon, and Vince has had some creative input, but ultimately it falls on Vince McMahon. But there's a lot of people raising eyebrows of that. How much creative input has Vince had? Is this basically you just putting a final stamp on his ideas, or is he just kind of spitballing some ideas? What's happening here? So it's changing by the minute still.
Are you surprised that Steph stepped away on two parts? Obviously her stepping down from her position, but then also I think to me, what was more shocking is that she literally left the board, which was kind of needed because there was people did not want Vince McMahon to come back. Things were good. Mm-hmm. For those that didn't know, things were good. Ratings were good. People were happy. People were buying stuff. People were showing up to shows. But were you surprised that Steph stepped away in both parts of her day-to-day job in the corporate side and then leaving the board as well?
No, and I'll say why I wasn't surprised. Stephanie McMahon, she took a leave of absence a year ago, and it seemed like she had kind of been setting herself up to leave the company before and was kind of roped back into it almost unwillingly when all of the Vince scandal stuff broke out. And it was basically a case of, look, we can't run this company without you. You know it. You're the only person who seems capable of running it now, knowing that Vince is out. And with Vince back, I think she saw it as a case of, then what am I needed here for? And I'm going to go back to what I tried to do before. I think she was being honest in that regard, that, she brought up in her resignation letter to the fans that she took that leave of absence last year, and that was kind of one of the first steps toward leaving. I think it wasn't surprising in that sense. I think we kind of saw that coming.
But do you see, there are some people that said, hey, she kind of left the first time because she knew these allegations were coming out. And now if there's more allegations or whatever happens, she's like, I don't want my name associated. Is there any truth to that? Or is that just people talking because they love to talk?
I mean, I don't know for sure because there's a lot of rumors floating around as far as what that could potentially be about. And I can't really say one way or the other.
Fair enough. That wasn't a fair question because I'm still very speculative. Yeah. Triple H, do you think however this plays out, how long do you see him being a part of the WWE? I guess that's the best way to put it.
For life. I think at some point he's always going to have a position there. Whether or not he remains head of creative, that remains to be seen. One of the things that Triple H didn't necessarily do, and a lot of people had questions about that, was he didn't fully install his entire regime, right? That a lot of Vince McMahon's guys were still in place for the last year. Guys like Kevin Dunn has still been in charge of production the entire time. Bruce Pritchard has still been one of the higher ups in creative, and those are guys who are very, very close to Vince McMahon. A lot of people thought that those guys' days would be numbered, and they weren't. And so it's almost still set up in a way for Vince to walk back in and resume as it was. Now, granted, a lot has changed. I don't know creatively how much work he'd have to do because there have never been any gaps in Vince McMahon's creative. He's never had to pick up on somebody else's creative the way that, say an Eric Bischoff came into WCW, he had to pick up on Bill Watts' creative, right? And then and that's happened from time to time over
with
the years,
this none. It's never happened.
Yeah, it's never happened. Vince has never had to pick up on somebody else's. It's always been a continuation of what he's done. And for the first time now, he would have to walk into a space and pick up on what someone else is doing, and that's really interesting. I don't know that he's actually going to get on the creative side. He said he isn't, and that was his direct word. Now, it's the business world. A lot can change. He can suddenly cite that circumstances have changed, and now he does see a need to be head of creative again. Who knows? But at the moment,
apparently he can do whatever the hell he wants. He can just, because I said so.
Pretty much. Yeah. So the thing about Triple H being the head of creative is that it's not to say it has been all sunshine and rainbows, because it hasn't. I think he has a much more refreshing vision for his show, for sure. I think SmackDown in particular has been much, much better than it was under Vince. But Hunter has his own issues, and some of those issues kind of stem from the fact that he doesn't necessarily know the as they call it, the WWE universe, as well as he kind of knew that NXT verse, and where a lot of things aren't getting crowd reactions. And that's one thing that Vince kind of did know better than Hunter, is how to get those fans in those arenas to react. There's been multiple debuts over the last couple of months that have kind of fallen on silence, and that's something that Hunter's kind of had to work through and figure out a little bit better. And I don't know that they're going to see that as much of a success. Like, if there was anything to hold against him in order to remove him from the position, it's probably that. And I could very much see that happening.
Will Washington joining us here, 1140 The Bet, Audacy Sports. And like I said at the beginning, there's been a lot of talk with Dana White and UFC and everything going on there. And of course, talking here about Vince McMahon. I'm kind of want to ask you, are you surprised at some of the mainstream attention this WWE news has been getting in terms of Vince coming back and selling the company? Because like even over the weekend, Anderson Cooper's doing a whole thing on CNN and all this stuff. Are you surprised at the attention?
No, I'm not surprised by it. WWE is still one of the biggest companies in the world. They're still, I think, in the top 100 most recognizable companies. Maybe not 100. I know it's really high up, though, as far as recognizable companies on earth, right? Like, people know WWE. People don't even know professional wrestling. If you talk to people about wrestling, they'll be like, "Oh, you mean WWE?" Like, they are a name that is synonymous with the sport. And so it is anything that goes on with that company, as far as anything that's affecting the company, whether it being Vince McMahon allegations, anything along those lines, it's always going to be mainstream news. And the fact that they're also a publicly traded company, and not just a publicly traded company, but a big publicly traded company. Just last week, they're trading at $90 a share. Those aren't small potatoes. Like, this is a major company. And so anything involving them has huge financial implications, and has it's going to make mainstream news, basically.
And another thing that kind of made me happy, and I will say, I'll preference this, it's just my timeline, and my timeline is not an indication of the world or wrestling in general, just the people that I follow. But it was cool because having these conversations about Dana White and bringing guests on that covered UFC and MMA fully, they were very, very just like heartbroken and disappointed that a lot of the conversation dealing with that is people defending Dana White, and where Dana White literally had to go in his press conference and say, for those people that are defending me, stop it, I'm in the wrong. Whereas when the news broke out and the rumor that Saudi Arabia was going to purchase the WWE, there was a lot of people on my timeline like, this is the line, and I'm done and I'm out. Which, to be honest, with me and the WWE, if that would have happened, I kind of would have been as well. Were you surprised first off, was that the reception or the feeling that you got from wrestling at large? And were you surprised by that?
I mean, so it was tough, right? Because I was trying my hardest not to fully take in that news as potential truth, right? Because I recognize there is smoke to that fire, and I fully believe that
it takes time, even if it
takes
true.
time, right? On Tuesday, it was like it's a done deal, and I thought, there's no way. I don't believe that any way, shape, or form, and I refused to comment on it until I felt like it was closer to a done deal. But just looking at it at the time, of course, we're talking about Saudi Arabia and their public investment fund. Now, they have a hand in a lot of American companies. So it wasn't even surprising necessarily. They've already been involved with WWE for so long. For the last 5 years, they've been running pay-per-views, or I guess they call them premium live events now, but they've been running events in Saudi Arabia since the Greatest Royal Rumble. They do Crown Jewel. They've done Super Showdown. They've done all of these shows. Elimination Chamber last year was there as well. They've been doing these shows in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabia pays a lot of money for these. And so it wasn't surprising that their name popped up. And yeah, there's a lot of talent concerned about that. And not from a perspective of it being run like the Saudi government runs things, because if that were the case, again, Saudi Arabia is invested in a lot of American companies. And it's more so having that, basically having a hand in our financial institutions. It's a much bigger thing than that. So I'm not necessarily concerned about how WWE would be run in a sense, but I do think that there is concern around, certain talents, right? Like Sami Zayn, one of the biggest stars in WWE, can't actually work the events that take place in Saudi Arabia. And so, I had heard from a couple of talents who were concerned about them taking over as potential majority owners of the company and potentially not wanting to work there any longer. It's a different landscape for the business than it was a year ago, because a year ago there was kind of this excitement over the fact that WWE for a long time was considered kind of creatively bankrupt and not necessarily a place people wanted to work if they wanted the freedom of creative expression. And then when Hunter took over last year, it was like, okay, now there's a even playing field as far as wrestling companies out there, and there's desire to, and you always want to see that because it's great for the wrestlers. And to see right now wrestlers starting to feel uneasy about WWE again is really a shame.
No, honestly, it is, especially like we're months away from WrestleMania. Royal Rumble's in less than 2 weeks. When it comes to selling, though, outside of the investment fund for Saudi Arabia being involved, we've heard Disney and ESPN, we've heard Comcast, which is NBC, and Universal. For you, who do you want them to sell to?
Who? I don't, honestly, I don't have a good answer for that. And I wish I could have a good answer for that. But, Eric Bischoff was a name I brought up earlier. And of course, for those unaware, he was former president of WCW at one point, and WCW was purchased by WWE in 2001 and shut down. Eric Bischoff once said that one of the reasons he was ultimately happy that the buyer of WCW ended up being WWE is the fact that WWE has an interest in preserving its legacy. And he's like, I'm not sure that you would be able to watch WCW content today if anybody else had bought it. Had it ended up in the hands of a major media company, well, what happens when it's not doing well? Would that major media company just like shut it down, throw it in a vault, we never hear about it again? Happens all the time. Comcast,
HBO.
Yeah. And so ending up in the hands of a major media company whose sole interest is not professional wrestling is a concern to me, no matter who it is, because again, they've got to focus on their overall bottom line. And if wrestling doesn't fit the overall bottom line at some point, what would stop them from basically throwing it away when they're not using it? So that's my concern. I always feel like
it's an underrated concern that a lot of people haven't even mentioned, because, even another thing that I think that's important to bring up, like memorabilia and the stuff that they have, like physical stuff that preserves the history, but not only that, their archive that isn't even, I don't know if all of it's available. I'm assuming not on Peacock since the transition from the network, but they still own the rights to all of that. So basically, the wrestling history, not only are they the WWE, but they're the Hall of Fame for it, and they have all that. And to your point, what if they're HBO and they're like, let's cancel this show? And as a matter of fact, we never released the DVD box set of the season. We'll just take it off the app. And now it really doesn't exist because you can't get it anywhere because it's not on the app, which could very well happen, to your point, that I think a lot of people aren't really discussing, because that's an important factor in all of this.
Yeah, I think because that's what happened with WCW. WCW was owned by Time Warner at the time, and Time Warner suddenly at one point decided wrestling wasn't in the interest of their company's future. And so that was it. They were done with it. And just thinking about how Comcast has been all in on WWE for the last 17 years, 18 years almost. And so that's not to say that, Comcast has shown any signs right now that it isn't fully invested, right? They've been the owners of USA Network. Or I guess USA Network was owned by NBC Universal. Comcast didn't come into the picture till
it's all confusing, but I know what you're saying.
You get you get what I'm saying though. But either way, NBC Universal as a company has been invested in WWE for a really, really long time. But of course,
one change of power.
On a smaller scale, look at G4. G4 was a company that's been owned by Comcast since day one. But the moment it wasn't working for Comcast, it's gone. And there's no trace of it. There's no, hey, at least it's, available online. It's available to Peacock. Nothing. It's gone. And so that's one of those concerns I have when a major corporation whose bottom line isn't just professional wrestling has control over the professional wrestling. That's a thing I don't necessarily want to see. I still believe that wrestling needs to be in control of its own destiny because it is such a different beast from anything else out there in entertainment media.
No, 100%. And listen, I feel like we're way over time. We could talk about this for hours. So before we get you out of here, some quick hitters. First and foremost, how should AEW fans feel about all this going on with WWE?
I would say the interesting thing about AEW right now is that they've been on a roll creatively. I feel like they've had some of their best shows pretty much since the top of December. I would say
I know Tony Khan is hyped right now because of the Jags.
Yeah, I know he's hyped right now. And I feel like when Tony's in a good mood, that's when he gets to write his best stuff. And look, the Jags through the second half of the season went 7-2. Like, honestly, I feel like there's a correlation between AEW being good creatively and all of a sudden the Jags also are having one of the best runs they've had in the last decade. I would say for AEW fans, just keep watching that show because at the end of the day, it shouldn't truly affect a whole lot because AEW is a privately run company that seems to be in good. Now, of course, there is one concern, and this gets dropped constantly, and that's the fact that I don't think it's going to happen because there's a lot of other things, but AEW airs on Warner Brothers Discovery networks. Warner Brothers Discovery was named as a potential buyer for WWE. That is something to be concerned about. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's a matter of
if the Jags win the Super Bowl, they might open up the checkbook and be like, who cares? Let's just buy it. Who cares? Real quick, how do you think all of this stuff, and obviously there's still a fluid situation, nothing's set in stone. How do you think this affects WrestleMania?
I had a bet at the end of last year that Vince was going to be the one writing WrestleMania. And that was when the rumor first emerged that he could potentially be back. I still feel like Vince will, it's interesting, right? Vince has always talked about WrestleMania as his baby. That's his biggest and most successful creation. And I always wondered how he felt giving that up, because giving up SummerSlam, it's whatever. Giving up Survivor Series, again, does that really matter? Giving up the Royal Rumble, that's probably like where it's like, ooh, I don't know. But WrestleMania is the one I couldn't see him giving up. And sure enough, just as we're getting into the road to WrestleMania, here he is. And the thing is, a lot of his stars are potentially working that show. We know John Cena is going to be there. There's talk of Steve Austin working that show. There's been rumors of The Rock for the last year. I can't see Vince
but that was also the thing that, like, The Rock does not need any bad press. And everything going on with Black Adam. And I'm like, does he really want to put his name to this and be associated with this?
Oh yeah, I think I wonder now if that's actually going to happen. It seems like they've already got their contingency plans in place for The Rock. I don't know that he's going to be there.
It's a shame. Black Adam was a decent movie too. Anyway, two more. Sasha Banks. Obviously a lot of people were excited in LA. They were at the Forum. It was teased. Ultimately, she didn't show up. How do you think this next year, 2023, is going to play out for Sasha?
So
Mercedes Monè, excuse me.
Yeah,
my fault.
The now Mercedes Monè. Obviously she signed with New Japan Pro Wrestling. She's with Bushiroad, so that means she's also going to be working Stardom shows, and there's the Battle in the Valley show coming up. It's going to be really interesting because she seems to be a major player for New Japan Pro Wrestling. And while she didn't show for, a lot of people did, including myself. I was thinking she was going to be there at the Forum in LA, and she was not. So a lot of speculation over whether or not she ever does sign with AEW. I don't know that she will, but AEW has a working relationship with New Japan and a show they put on every year, as you see over my shoulder, Forbidden Door. And I don't know how you do Forbidden Door having New Japan's biggest stars and not having her there. So I think in some capacity she has to over this next year. But it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. She's in control of her destiny. She just today trademarked the name The CEO. I think that and that Battle in the Valley show that she's main eventing has sold a lot of tickets. I do think that she has a big year ahead of her.
And my final question, which for some of us that are watching and not listening on our podcast app, this might be the moment where you don't hit subscribe on the YouTube, and that's okay. But CM Punk is my GOAT. I know he's been active on social media. Look at his face. He's like, no, I liked you, Adrian. No, I enjoy CM Punk, and obviously he's been a little snippy on the Instagram on MGF's IG and stuff. Do you see CM Punk wrestling in AEW again or ever?
My gut feeling on that is yes. That is just my gut feeling. That's not with any inside information. That's more so just with me feeling like I think ultimately, this is just my thoughts on this. CM Punk signed a big contract with AEW, was paid a lot of money, and is still being paid a lot of money from AEW to basically sit on the sidelines right now. When you listen to Tony Khan talk about CM Punk and AEW, he still talks about that time very fondly as far as the time on screen. And so to me, it doesn't seem like creatively Tony Khan is done with CM Punk by any stretch. I think it's more of a, obviously there's a lot of factors there as far as CM
real life factors.
Yeah, real life factors. But look, we eventually saw Bret Hart back at WWE. I can never say never in professional wrestling, and my gut feeling tells me that CM Punk has not worked his last AEW match. I had an interview with Tony Khan about 3 weeks ago. It was my final question, and he said, I can't. My final question was, do we see CM Punk back in an AEW ring? He said, I can't answer that. And granted, I believe him. I don't think at this stage he can answer that, but I also think that's because he doesn't at this stage know the answer to that. That's my gut feeling on that.
And ultimately, when there's money to be made, there's money to be made. But Will, before we get you out of here, any plugs and letting people know where they can get into contact and see and listen to all the content you guys produce?
Sure. Yeah, I can be found. Look, I'm on Twitter. I'm William RBR. I host a lot of shows for Fightful. I host Day After Dynamite every Thursday. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. I also host Grapsody every Saturday. That's at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And also I'm on Denise Salcedo's channel as well. We host a show called After the Week. We do that every Sunday. And that is at sorry, can't remember my time zone.
You got so many damn shows.
I know. That one, that's 1 p.m. Eastern. That's 10 a.m. Pacific every Sunday, where we recap all of the best stuff of the week. I'm podcasting a lot. I've been doing it 18 years. So I'll probably be podcasting into the grave. They'll be at my funeral, and there'll be a little microphone right next to me. And this is what I do.
Look, for me as a dad with a 4-year-old son who's incredibly impressionable, so sometimes I can't watch the wrestling, I appreciate what you guys do over there to keep me informed when I can't watch the product all the time. So thank you for what you guys do, and we'd love to have you back on the show here before WrestleMania. Thank you for the time, Will.
Hey, thank you, Adrian.